Theology. Unplugged.
Hey friends, welcome to Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and I'm going to give you a special session today. Now, if you listened yesterday and my introduction to the bibliology section of the Through Theology in a Year that I'm going through, you heard me talk about Martin Luther quite a bit. Now, I found this interesting. I was watching a short video, A Message to All Protestants, by Emmanuel. I'm with them, but just for the sake right now, think of him as an Eastern Orthodox. He's certainly not a Roman Catholic, but as you can see, as you will hear whenever I go through this, his affinity towards the Eastern Church and his desire for Protestants to become Eastern. Now, he talks about Martin Luther, and I want to draw attention to a few things that he says, a lot of mistakes that he makes that I think are really interesting mistakes, especially considering what I talked about yesterday, and the diet of worms, where Martin Luther gave his famous "Here I stand, I can do no other" speech that I talked about, that established sola scriptura, or didn't establish it, but really is iconic for us in our understanding of what we call Martin Luther's trilateral, where Martin Luther believes that the scripture is the final authority, and the church tradition and reason serve scripture. They are authorities, but they are not they can err, whereas the scripture cannot err. That is sola scriptura. The scripture alone is the final infallible authority in all matters of faith and practice for the Christian, although I usually put it the only articulated infallible authority. We don't have any other articulated sources and such. Anyway, this will be good for us whenever we're talking about sola scriptura. Those of you who want to learn a little bit of church history, hopefully you'll get something from this. This is a Friday session. I didn't put out anything for any questions and answers today, but we'll get back to that next week, especially when we get more rolling on the Through Theology in a Year, and I open that up to my Patreon's questions and answers. Remember that this program and everything I do, I'm not trying to give you guys just normal, everyday theology, kind of high level, and that's all there is to it. I'm really trying to dig deep. I'm putting a lot of faith in what I know you can do because of what I know I can do. I'm not a smart guy. I've never been a smart guy. But, I mean, as a matter of fact, I got a .33 in 7th grade, and then got a .66 to pull myself out of that the next semester. And then in college, I also got a .33 and a .66, got kicked out. Not a smart guy. I mean, maybe you might say that it's because I made bad decisions, which is probably a lot of that, but I don't consider myself that smart. And I think that's great because I think, hey, if I can figure this stuff out and I can get excited about it, anybody can, and anybody will. So that's the trust I'm putting out there whenever I get into this ministry that I've been doing for 25 years now, and it's the reason why I've been doing it. I mean, because I know it's true. And I've seen the look on people's faces whenever they begin to learn theology. I see the same look on their faces that I felt being expressed on mine whenever I first started to learn theology. So this is going to be fun. I don't know if I'll see that look on your face today because I'm just, this is shooting at the hip with this one, but let's listen to old Emmanuel talk about Martin Luther and his message to Protestants.
I'll have to say this, Christianity, we can put it into three groups: Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants. This is the main groups: Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants. Protestants branched out from the Catholic Church. Martin Luther had an issue with the Pope of his time, which was Pope Leo X. I must say, with all love and respect, I'm talking, by the way, please, no hard feelings, no. Pope Leo X, at the time, he was doing things biblically incorrect. That's history. Don't be upset if you're a Catholic. Pope Leo X was doing things biblically I have a lot of question marks about. Martin Luther, who was Catholic, by the way, born German. Germans are strong, very strong-headed, eh? So Martin Luther, raised in the Catholic Church, he was a monk priest. He used to pray the rosary. He used to celebrate the Holy Mass. He used to say, this is the body and the blood of Christ. He was a Catholic. Then he saw the Pope doing certain things which were wrong, biblically were wrong. So what, you're a Pope? You are susceptible to making mistakes. You're a human, and every human is under the influence of making mistakes.
Now, one thing to notice first off here is that I think he may be agreeing with Martin Luther and agreeing with Protestants about the Pope making mistakes. You don't want to misunderstand this, because this can be very much a straw man that he is giving if this is the way he intends it. Even the Catholic Church had a counter-reformation from 1546 to 1565, I believe it was. It's called the Counter-Reformation, and the Council of Trent was convened for that many years, and they came up with the documents of Trent, which are still in effect today. They did correct a lot of stuff, and they do recognize the need for reform. They did recognize the problems that the Catholic Church was having. But you got to understand, the Catholic Church can have problems. Even in their own doctrine, there can be lots and lots of problems, lots of bad stuff going on, lots of immorality. There can even be some bad teaching. It just can't be official teaching. It can't be authoritative teaching. The Pope himself is a sinner. The Pope rarely, if ever, speaks ex cathedra from the chair. Therefore, the Pope can be born and die, and everything that comes out of his mouth be wrong. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not authoritative in some sense, because there's a difference between dogma and doctrine. Dogma is that which is not wrong, never. It's eternal. Doctrine is what you follow by today that can be adjusted. So anyway, the Pope, or the Catholic Church at the time, did understand that they were having problems with morality, problems that even the indulgences that Martin Luther criticized in his 95 Theses in 1517, whenever he nailed the 95 Theses to the castle doors of Wittenberg. Even they might agree with many of those things. Many of what they agree with Martin Luther in his criticism of John Tetzel, who was selling plenary indulgences, saying, "Hey, if you give me a certain amount of money, I'll get you out of every sin, past, present, and future." They say that was wrong. He shouldn't have done that. Also, whenever he says, John Tetzel used to say, every time a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from springs, they said that was wrong as well. That was manipulative. It was a bad way to raise money for St. Peter's Basilica, which Leo X was raising money for at the time. So they recognized the problem. So I don't want this to be a straw man and see as if the Catholic Church or Catholics today who are in the know would say that there were no problems going on. And if you prove there are any problems going on then or even today in the Catholic Church, then you have got us in the horns of a dilemma. You don't. It is something that they see very much today, even with the current Pope. Most conservative Catholics don't like the current Pope, don't like what he is doing. Now, of course, it becomes more and more, and the accumulation of the problematic stuff kind of takes away from any weightiness of its usefulness after a while. So there is that, but at the same time, what he is saying here, even Catholics back in that day and today would agree with.
So he went and questioned the Pope. He had about 97 theses. He put it before the Pope and he said, I want you to answer them. In retaliation to the action of Martin Luther, without bringing Martin Luther and questioning him and seeing what his intentions were, the Pope, in return, he excommunicates Martin Luther from the Catholic Church. Excommunication is the ultimate punishment you give a clergyman.
Now, one thing to note is that I thought it was funny. He calls it 97 thesis. You know, he's not a Protestant whenever he calls it the 97 thesis, when it's the 95 thesis. But he also says that the Pope did not listen to him at all, just goes off and excommunicates him. That's not really true. I mean, he did excommunicate him in 1521, just before the Diet of Worms. There was a series of correspondence that goes on between them, and there's also a debate that happens. I want to talk about that debate in just a second. That happened in 1519.
You are now detaching that person from Christ completely. In other words, this person is going to hell. So Martin Luther was excommunicated by the Pope, Leo X. What did Martin Luther do? He had followers. So they protested against the Catholic Church, and they became the Protestant branch of Christendom. Protestantism comes from the word to protest. They protested against the Catholic Church. I can assure you, if Martin Luther had known there was orthodoxy in the East, he wouldn't have created a branch of his own. He would have gone and joined orthodoxy, because what he began with was absolute orthodox belief.
Now, that's not really true. I mean, again, this guy shows that he doesn't know that much. Martin Luther did know about the Eastern Church quite a bit, as a matter of fact. I mean, so much so that after Luther's death, there is a series of correspondence between the Tübingen theologians in Germany, kind of Luther's successors, with Patriarch Jeremiah II. And you can read this in this book. I mean, it's got every single one of these all put together. Kind of a sad story, but I mean, a good story in the sense of the way in which Eastern Orthodox and Lutherans go back and forth, because Luther saw himself as being very close to the Eastern Church, to Eastern Orthodoxy. As a matter of fact, I would say probably in his own mind he considered Eastern Orthodoxy before reforming the church from within, or maybe he was using Eastern Orthodoxy to reform the Western Church because he respected the Eastern Orthodox theologians so much, referred to them all the time, and obviously did not become an Eastern Orthodox, thought that they needed reform too in some way eventually, but at the same time had great respect for them and didn't think that they were reformed enough. Their problems were still their problems that the Protestants needed to correct. They held on to some of the same problems as the Catholics in Luther's day. Now, here we have this. And Luther talked about this in his debate with Eck, E-C-K, Eck, Johann Eck, in 1519, the one of his first debates, which Luther probably lost this debate, or at least from the standpoint of the crowd and from the standpoint of what Eck was trying to do, a Catholic theologian. Luther lost this debate because Eck really pushed Luther into something I'm sure he knew the direction he was going, but to be able to have it stated publicly this way, to have it out in the open this way, he forced Luther to admit that the Pope is wrong, can err, which Luther did in that debate. He forced Luther to admit that the councils could err, because Eck was comparing Luther with Huss, one Huss. And Huss, Huss, he was a pre-reformer. He was a reformer who came before Luther that was killed for his doctrine. He was burned at the stake. And Eck just wanted to identify Luther during this debate to the crowd and to Luther himself. He wanted him to admit that he agreed with Huss, because he did not agree with the indulgences that were going on. That's what Luther wrote the 95 Theses for, even though a year before, Luther had already had his kind of experience, his conversion experience, after he started reading the Bible, studying the New Testament, teaching the New Testament. This is whenever he came to the realization that justification is by faith alone, and that the righteousness by which God requires for justification is not the righteousness that we are to present to God, but what Jesus Christ presented to God, which God himself requires of us, but takes it through Jesus Christ. And so this was his great transformation that he says he had. The reason why I think it was probably earlier, 15 or so, maybe 15, 16, 15, 17, right around there, between 15, 15 and 15, 17, was because he said he had it while he was on the toilet. Now, there's a couple of things that people do here. They talk about him, actually, he had digestive problems. He did. I mean, he talks about it a lot in his writings. He has digestive problems. We actually excavated Luther's basement, which was a large bathroom, like a high-tech bathroom for the day. You can look at aerial photos of it. It's pretty amazing, with vents and everything else. I mean, he had his own little bathroom that he would go to in private, and he would that's where he would fight with the devil and have his revelations. But he probably was, although I don't know, every time I think about it, I go back and forth, but he probably was just talking about he was down in the dumps. I was on the toilet. It was just one of those bad days type things, although he might have been on the toilet. And if he was on the toilet, maybe it came a little bit later, but it couldn't have come too late. Because by the time he gets to his debates with Eck, he doesn't seem to be this unsure man anymore. He seems to be very moving forward at a very high pace, sure of him and his relationship with God, and to the point where he can stand up at the Diet of Worms and stand up against the entire council. But anyway, so that is his debate with Eck. Oh, and also during this debate with Eck, he's pushed to say the councils were wrong, to say the Pope can err, that the councils can err, that they erred in condemning Huss. That was one thing. And whenever he identified with Huss, he admitted that he found many things attractive that Huss believed, which Huss believed the same kind of things that he did, that the Pope was not the head of the church, that Christ was the head of the church, that the Bible was the primary authority. Many of those same things. Huss was a pre-reformer. Then he also, at this point, admitted, he said, well, listen, the Eastern Church does not submit to the Pope, and yet these are very good Christians. That was one of the points where I was talking about where he was acting like he didn't know about the Eastern Church. This guy, he's acting like Luther should have known about the Eastern Church, but he didn't, or he would have become an Eastern Orthodox. That's not true. He did know about the Eastern Church. So all that to say this. Okay, let's see here. Go back to this guy.
So he would have been saved by the Orthodox. So what he did, he said, no, I need to save these Catholic people from this Pope. So I have to save them. He created a branch and they became Protestants. And the first branch of Protestantism was the Lutheran Church, named after Martin Luther. Luther became the Lutheran Church. When you go to a Lutheran church, you will see till now they still have certain things like an apostolic traditional Catholic Church has. They celebrate, they say this is the body and the blood. They say the Nicene Creed. They have some sort of a liturgical service, not fully like the Catholic Church, but they still have the touch of the Catholic Church in the Lutheran, since it was the first ever established branch after the split and departing from the Catholic Church. That happened in the 16th century. After 500 and odd years later, we have about 800 million Protestants worldwide, with over 3,000 branches alone in America. And every branch says I'm right.
Okay, another thing here, I mean, I think there's closer to now 1 billion Protestants. This was brand new, though, so I don't think he has the updated numbers, or maybe my numbers are wrong. I don't know. But, you know, I've checked recently, and it's close to 900, the late 900s to 900 million to 1 billion Protestants. And he says 3,000 Protestant branches. You guys have heard me talk about this before, or at least I've written about it. I don't know. I did it sometime lately, but this is just, I think that this is so misleading whenever you talk about the Protestants are 3,000 different branches, or sometimes you hear it all the way up to 33,000. I even heard one recently that was 45,000 different branches of Protestant churches, and it just all depends on how you number them. But it's really not true. There's only five. You know, I can count on two hands all the major Protestant branches that make up 95% of all Protestants. And then there's minor branches. There's the reason why there's so many, he probably says there's so many, he says in America alone, it's probably because he's basing it upon how many of these churches are still filing for tax write-off, and they're non-denominational. Every non-denominational church has to file by itself as a denomination. So the government, he's probably getting these as government numbers, not necessarily as religious numbers. And then another thing, you got to understand whenever you see the big picture is all Protestants believe primarily the same things. Now, we might fight like cats and dogs because the dogs of the closest breed always fight the hardest, but that doesn't mean we're not very close. Doesn't mean we do not agree upon much. I mean, whether you're Calvinist or Arminian, you both believe in justification by faith alone. You both believe that the scriptures are the final and only infallible authority. We just have this openness about us. We believe that there's an elasticity to our ecclesiastical structure. We do not say you have to be under this type of structure and it's all one. That's not part of our doctrine. So of course we're going to have it's kind of like saying you got a family over here who is a family and they all live in the same house and they just build onto that same house. But then you got a family over here that's a family, and they have kids and they have children, and instead of building on, they build new houses, you know, and start their own family. And why would you do that? You might say, listen, I just want you to have your own family, experience what it's like on your own, decorate the house how you want, you know, let your wife do what she wants to with all the house and such, instead of being at our house and being confined to the way we do things. So that's kind of the more way to look at it. Both of us see ourselves as one family. Protestants are one family. Catholics are one family. Eastern Orthodox are one family. I would see us as even all three part of the bigger family. And maybe you got this one group in the family that did go out and build a really, really big house, and another group that built a pretty darn big house, and then this whole group that says, hey, let's just all build our own houses. We'll visit each other every once in a while, that kind of thing. So it's a misunderstanding in so many ways when you talk about criticizing Protestants because of all the denominations. It's like criticizing God for creating people with many personalities or many different opinions on stuff. There are a lot of things we don't know the answer to. And so as Protestants, we don't create a big, thick book that says, here's everything you have to believe. We give a lot of freedom, and based upon that freedom, you might be able to, create your own structure over here. And sometimes you may overblow the importance of your particular variation within the family, but it doesn't mean that that variation actually is that important. It's just you believe it is. So whenever you have different denominations, whenever I look at this, I say, hey, listen, it is one big family, Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox, because we're all under Christ. I think that's the most important thing, because we all say Christ is the Son of God who died on the cross, rose from the grave, and is our only hope to stand before God. He became fully God and fully man. He was, the second person of the Trinity who was fully God. Jesus Christ became fully man as well. We all agree upon that. We all agree upon who Christ is and what he did. So I see the entirety of the Christian church, at least Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, and Catholics, those who know what that means and those who are those because they know what it means. I see all of us as one big family. And I see the particular Protestant branch of the family as doing things better. I think we have more of the fullness of the gospel, even though Jesus Christ is the gospel, even though Jesus Christ is our salvation, even though Jesus Christ is our authority. We all would say this, but we just have variations within that. So if you think of it as in a big picture, all you got is one family with lots of different houses. And you may go to this house because it's really big. And you say, you know what, that's the biggest house. I'm going to go there. Baptist house is pretty big too. The Southern Baptist house. Why don't you go there? Are you just trying to find the biggest house? Or are we trying to find that which we believe is the most correct? And also the one that allows freedom? Because some of these houses don't allow you to leave. They don't allow you to look out the windows. But what about a house over here who says, hey, listen, you can go travel to whatever house you want and check it out. And if you end up going there, no problem. We're all in a house. We're all part of the same family. That feels different. That feels almost even better. I want to stay at that kind of house. I don't want to stay into an overly legalistic type house that has too high of a view of itself. Whenever I don't think God, it was as clear as we think he was on every single issue. There's a lot of freedom and a lot of things out there we do not know. And so with most of the stuff outside of the person and work of Christ, I'm not sure about. So I'm not willing to go and lock the door behind me in any one of these houses. Okay, so here's basically why I've done this. I think it's the reason why I've done it, because I thought it was very interesting and very funny. I talked about there were 3,000 Protestant denominations and acted like that was not a good thing because everybody has their own way of doing things. Well, this guy is a part of the Assyrian Church of the East. He is not Eastern Orthodox. He is not Roman Catholic, and he's not Protestant. He was part of the Assyrian Church of the East. And the Assyrian Church of the East are basically those who are accused of Nestorianism. Now, I don't believe that they are truly Nestorianists, as I don't even believe Nestorius was truly a Nestorian. But Nestorians are accused of separating Christ into two persons. So it's not two natures, one person, it's two persons inside of one body. So that's a multiple personality Christ. We can't have that. That's weird. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't even make any sense for him to become Christ. Did Christ team up with Jesus, and say, hey, listen, we're going to be working together for the next 33 years, so let's get to know each other, and, sometimes I'll do miracles, and sometimes you cry. Sometimes I will walk on water, and sometimes you, in the garden, sweat drops of blood. That is the way we're going to play this game out. No, not at all. It's one person. Christ is one person. That is very firmly established in the Creed of Chalcedon, or the Chalcedonian definition in 451. I believe in Chalcedon. I believe that it's two natures, one person. Now, Nestorians are accused of believing in two persons. But that's not really what these churches, like the Assyrian Church of the East, it's not really what they hold to. They do not think Christ is two persons, a multiple personality. But he did belong to this church that was accused of believing Christ was two persons, when in reality, all they just objected in the Chalcedonian definition, which you've heard me talk about a lot here, which I respect very much. But in the Chalcedonian definition, they do not like Mary being called Theotokos, which is the mother of God, because they think it sounds heretical. Christ isn't Mary's not the mother of God. She is the mother of the human aspect of Jesus, the human nature of Jesus, but you can't say she's the mother of God, because it sounds like that means God came into being. So that is their objection. She is not Theotokos, the mother of God, or God-bearer. That's what it's called in the Creed of Chalcedon. Mary is the God-bearer, and that really says nothing about Mary. Okay, so those of you who think, oh, this is elevating Mary and that's their problem, that wasn't their problem. Their problem wasn't her being called God-bearer because it would elevate her. They did not like her being called God-bearer because it devalues Christ. Okay? And the people who wanted her to be called God-bearer weren't doing it to elevate her and to say, no, she's something great. Just like I believe that Theotokos is a fine word. I don't mind her being called God-bearer, because I'm not saying she birthed the divinity of Christ. I'm saying that which came out of her womb was the God-man. So I want to emphasize that, and that's all they're trying to emphasize at Chalcedon. However, having said all that, he comes from a tradition, the Assyrian Church of the East, which objected to Theotokos, that name in the Chalcedonian definition. They objected to it all the way back in 431, 20 years before Chalcedon, in the Third Ecumenical Council. So that's whenever they broke away, whenever Nestorius was condemned. They said, hey, Nestorius doesn't believe that it's two persons just because he wants Mary called Christotokos, Christ-bearer, or even Anthropotokos, man-bearer, bearer of man. We don't want her called Theotokos, God-bearer. It devalues Christ. So they split off at that time, not because they necessarily agreed at a fundamental theological level at all, but either way, they broke away. So they're not part of the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, or the Protestant Church, all three who are Chalcedonian. At least in our history, we have Chalcedonian roots. We have accepted the creed, or the definition, that says Mary is Theotokos, the God-bearer. They split away and said, no, we'll just call her Christotokos. You guys have fun, okay? But in their and the rest of their doctrine and the rest of their theology, they're very, very similar to the Eastern Orthodox Church. They do not have a pope. They do not believe in the pope, so they're not most similar with the Catholic Church. They do not have the same authority structure, and also they're from the East. Therefore, they have a different way of thinking. But at the same time, they are not Eastern Orthodox. So that's what I'm saying. This guy was not any of the three major traditions that he talks about at the beginning. He's not even any of the 3,000 Protestant traditions that he talks about. But he was part of the Assyrian Church of the East. And by the way, just as an aside, put this as a parenthesis, there's also other branches within in the Eastern Church that broke away at this time. They didn't break away in 431 because they were Nestorian, believing in two persons. They broke away in 451 when the Chalcedonian Creed was finally put together because they believed in some sort of monophysitist or a monophysite understanding of Christ, meaning they believe that Christ's two natures become one without, and even then you got to understand they're better called not monophysitists, but miaphysitists, because they would see the two natures coming together and remaining distinct yet being one nature. I know it's very difficult to understand. This is the reason why I say, listen, that we all, even all of these, this is the whole Oriental Orthodox churches, the Ethiopian Orthodox churches. You've heard of them before, probably. But there's a big group of churches out there that are the Ethiopian Orthodox, the Coptic. Coptic's another one, the Coptic Orthodox Church. All of these are monophysitites, or miaphysitites to be more accurate. But at the same time, all of them, they don't really disagree. I could sit down and have fellowship with someone who is called a Nestorian or called a monophysitist, because both of them, I understand where they're coming from, and I understand their problems. And I also understand that basically at the most fundamental level, they really do agree with me and the rest of Protestants and the rest of Roman Catholics and the rest of Eastern Orthodox. It's just a language barrier. It's just a language, the way we're using terms and certain things that they don't like, that I understand why they don't like it, but it doesn't mean or have the implications that they think. That's why, gosh, some of these churches are being reassumed into the Catholic. Some of these churches have fellowship in the Catholic Church right now. The Catholic Church has spread its wings and put it around them and said, yes, you guys are legitimate now because we have said you are, and you don't have to change your language. You don't have to call Christ this or Mary that or whatever, right? Now, really, that's the other. No, that's the Nestorians. That's true. That's it. But and also some of them find fellowship within, or are beginning to find fellowship within the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's taken this long, 1,500 years, for these churches to start coming back into the broader fold, because there's been 1,500 years of complete misunderstanding of what everybody believes. However, having said all that, this guy's he was a bishop in the Assyrian Orthodox Church of the East, but he was kicked out, which is so interesting, because whenever you look this guy up and figure out why he was kicked out, it's because he's ultra conservative, and the way he does things are kind of weird. He's on the internet. I mean, that's not really something the Assyrian Church of the East does. He's popular. It's not something they're used to, but he's also very ultra conservative from the standpoint of, here in America, whenever you listen to the things that he's against, I mean, he criticizes the Pope, the modern Pope right now. He criticizes any discussion of gay marriage. He criticizes even global warming. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that is controversial. And I think he speaks out about it. It's not as if these people believe in those things so much. It's just that he speaks so loudly about it. And he's got internet fame. and therefore they don't want him part of it anymore. So they excommunicated him, and an excommunication is not good. To be excommunicated as a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox or an Assyrian Church person from the Assyrian Church of the East is not good. I mean, they're basically saying you are outside of salvation. You cannot come back. Any way that you got forgiveness before, any way that you found the graces of Christ before in the church, you can't find him anymore because you have been excommunicated. You are outside of the ark of God, and you're floating in the waters getting ready to die. But they kicked him out. So what did he do? He went and started his own church, which that's why I started laughing about it. But whenever he's talking this way, I'm like, this guy has a church of his own that doesn't even belong to Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, or even the Assyrian Church of the East, Nestorian or any otherwise. Now, his theology from, if I was an Eastern Orthodox, I would say his theology is perfectly legitimate. It's fine. I mean, there's nothing that bad about it. He does not like the term theotokos. I get it. I can deal with it, but I've never liked it that much either. I'm fine with theotokos or Christotokos for the Mary, the Mother of God. But here he is talking about all these denominations of the Protestants whenever he goes out and just starts his own church, and he's a bishop in that church. Well, how did he become a bishop in that church? Well, he legitimized his bishopric. Even though he's been excommunicated, he's a legitimate bishop from his own standpoint, I guess, in this new separated line, because he was ordained within the Assyrian Orthodox Church, which finds its way back to the apostles. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting from him, and it really demonstrates so much kind of the hypocrisy sometimes that we have whenever we criticize the differences that we sometimes have in the churches. As I said, going back to the same family, to the same, just because we're living in different houses. Maybe I don't like your house. Maybe I don't understand it. Maybe I don't agree with some of the way you've built it. But at the same time, it's part of the same family because it's the same Christ. You are a defender of the person and work of Christ. And I like this guy. I mean, I like his conservatism. It's fun. It's fun seeing this come out of the East that way and being hypercritical about this stuff. So anyway, that is something to think about. I think that is Mari. So that is the place to go whenever you are looking for somebody fun on YouTube to listen to and to hear out of a person who was excommunicated out of the Assyrian Church of the East, which was excommunicated out of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. Listen, don't forget, go to my patreon.com. You find all kinds of stuff like this. Usually it's not this technical. Usually it's not this kind of specific, but I was watching this video last night and I thought, hey, that seems like fun to talk about. I don't know whether it was or not. You be the judge. I will see you next week as we start back on the bibliology and hermeneutics in my Through Theology in a Year series.
Theology